Hi everyone, my name is Robin Brown from Waste is My Resource. Today I'd like to show you how to turn this awful grey sand into some beautiful garden soil. There's actually no need to go and pay for expensive garden soils, although I like to support them as well. You can actually plant straight in the ground and build your soil up with a very easy technique that I'm going to show you today. So we started off with some of this useless sand that I've dug up from a property at Bayswater, and typical of Perth on the coastal plain in summer, this soil becomes hydrophobic. So what happens is that if there's any organic matter in this soil, bacteria as part of their makeup exude a little substance that helps bind soil together. Now when they die in our hot summers, that forms a wax around the sand, and so therefore it repels the water, and we get something typical happening like here, where the water runs off and you can see it beading on the sand, and not much will grow in that at all. Perhaps some coastal plants would. We need to change it to this soil over here, which apart from the physical colour difference, does this when I put water on it. Okay, so there's hardly any runoff and it's soaking in. And it's not difficult to do. One of the things you can do, and it's a one-off, so you have to go and purchase it unless you know someone with a farm, and that's a product that's got clay in it. Now there's lots of products on the market. This is one that I particularly use. It is crushed up dried clay, which I make reference to in some of my other videos. It comes from the wheat belt. It's adding value to a lot of farmers' income, which is wonderful. We add that into the sand, and clay is a water-holding natural material. It gives you a recommendation on the back of the packet, and you might have to do this several times till you get to a point where you feel that the horrible sand there is holding the clay. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to make a bit of a hole in here, and I'm going to add my clay to it. Now, while I'm making that hole, I'll also make reference to some of the things that you'll probably hear to do. If you know that your soil's hydrophobic, we often hear that it's necessary to add a wetter soil product. And yes, you can. This is a great one. It doesn't have chemicals in it. It's actually got fish emulsion in there as well, which is feeding your plants. What that is doing is actually breaking down some of that wax as well, but it has to be replaced. It has to be reapplied 3 to 4 times during summer, whereas the clay is a once-off. So you're probably better off doing this once and then adding your clay, and then you should be right. So we're going to add our clay powder to that dry. Make sure you add it to dry sand. If you don't, you get a yucky, gluey mess. So in that small amount there, I'm going to put 2 handfuls in, and we'll go back, and you do need to dig it in, because if you put it on the surface, then you get a sludgy mess, and that's why it won't work over lawns. You've got to do it to the soil before you start. And then you just need to mix that in. So the ideal way to do this is put it on the surface, get your 3-pronged rake and rake it through so it is going in to the soil without having to dig. It's not a good idea digging in gardens because it does disturb microbes. So that's what we're trying to do. And you should see a mixture of sand and those clay granules. That's what you should be looking for. So we're going to add that. Now, of course, there's a few things you can add other than just clay, and that's why my soil over here is very dark. I've added compost. So I've got lots of homemade compost, and I'm going to add that as well. And what I'm doing here, it's not just that I'm recycling food scraps. I've been breeding microscopic creatures, and those microscopic creatures are very important to the health of the plant. So things like fungi, bacteria, nematodes and protozoa need to be in the soil. So that's the biggest objective of compost, and I'm going to put that in there. If I'm lucky, there'll be a few worms going into there. Yes, they are. We've got them diving down there now. They're trying to get away from the light. This is home compost, so there's all sorts of things in here still. And I've got to mix that through as well. Bear in mind that there are some worms in there, so they do need to be mixed in and get away from the light, but they see to that themselves. They're pretty good at that. And the compost is like the wetter soil. That is going to have to be added every time you replant. You can just put that in a hole, but just for building up the soil to start with, you need to put lots and lots in there. Whereas the clay is a once off. That's why it is so good. All right, so we've got to that point, and that's where I'm going to add my water and start to get it to a slurry mix. But before I do, what I want to show you about this soil is that when you hold it up, it sticks together. That's how soil should be. So the bacteria in there are quite alive. They're moving around. They're exuding these little exudates which make it stick together. And of course the water helps as well. Now the microbes can't live unless it's wet. That's the other thing to remember too. So now we're going to add some water to that because it must hold that water. And you are going to get some runoff, remember, because you've already got those dead bacteria in there. So we need to mix that water through, and you'll see this grey sand start to change colour as the water and the organic matter mix together. And of course the clay starts to take on water, it'll get darker and darker. And from this stuff that just slides through my hands, we're going to get clumping soil. Now you can see now it's already gone from that light grey, it's getting darker and darker, but if we get the camera person to zoom in, we've still got big granules of clay there that haven't swollen and taken on the water yet. So it does take quite a bit of water to get that mixed through and to get it dissolved. So you'll have to add more and more water for that to happen. And then after a couple of sprinklers or hand sprinkles, you'll see that it's all sticking together. But the nice part, because you're very lucky really having sand as a base, is that it's still good drainage. It's still got air spaces for the water to get through, but you've got clay to hold on like a sponge. So this is actually starting to get really good. It's really starting to hold together, and that's the substance, that's the texture that we want, but we want more organic matter in, so it's really dark. So you go back and you add more compost, but we'll leave it at that. Now what I wanted to talk to you about is some extra things that you can add to hold water, one of which is, my block's upside down, a product of the waste industry. It's coir, made from coconuts. And a block like that makes up 30 litres, quite a lot. And I keep some in a pot already swollen and water added to it. And you can add some of that as well. It will break down in time the same way as your compost will, but it's adding a sponge to your soil currently, and that's what you need, particularly for young plants to survive. They need that access, that ready access to water to make them able to grow quickly. And that's starting to look like a pretty good soil. And I mean, you can get away without the coir. You just need to purchase that clay and make your own compost up, and you've got some fantastic soil without having to bring in truckloads of stuff. The only reason you would go and buy garden soil, in my opinion, is if you know your property was previously an old chicken run or a piggery, some intensive farming where you know that chemicals were sprayed to kill diseases, and they're residual. You don't want to be planting veggies in that. But for most people, go back to the old-fashioned way and plant in the ground, but make your soil into something like that. And you can see the aggregates forming. That's what plants need. Got lots of worms in there. They've got lots to eat on now, and we know that there's water in there. And it doesn't fall through my hands like this stuff did. So thanks for watching. Happy gardening.